Hey guys, it's Evie, or Luca as I'm going by now. Today I thought I'd try something different for once instead of the usual, so I'm going to be covering some early or scrapped assets from Spyro A Hero's Tale. But first, let's get this out of the way. I'm only going to be covering stuff primarily from the E3 demo, also known as the April 6, 2004 prototype. I'll also be avoiding anything that's already been documented unless there's more that's been found for them, so no Hogwarts or test level stuff. More on some of that later. I'll be using as much of my own footage and screenshots as I can, however I have been given permission to use some of the footage from earlier videos like Ebbe's cut enemy stuff. I'll leave their names on screen and links will be in the description. Lastly, if I get anything wrong, which I don't doubt I probably will, feel free to let me know and tell me what it needs to be corrected. Before we get into the E3 build, I want to mention some things that are in the final game. One of these I literally found out by accident when I was importing a map into Unreal Engine. Turns out the beam pillars that are used in the Neptune fight actually still use the beta lizard texture from that E3 demo and screenshot, albeit modified. Turns out everybody missed it, and honestly I don't blame them. I honestly didn't think that was there. Speaking of the lizard, while Crocodile Swamp isn't present in the demo, the Eurocom database file for the enemy itself is actually present, and it even retains the original texture. Anyway, here's the pillar with all three textures that I did for comparison. This next one only exists in the Xbox, specifically the North American release. It concerns the file test_HN. And yes, I'm aware this has been documented before. However, that's because the later builds of the game actually had the map completely changed. However, in the original North American release on the Xbox, the file actually contains an early version of Red's Lair from Icy Wilderness. Thanks to the level being loadable in Eurochef, I was actually able to capture footage. There's no spiked border or ice for the growing and shrinking platform yet, which means they were likely implemented at a later date. I was actually surprised that the Xbox version, specifically the North American version, was actually compiled first, because Eurocom were a British developer. I've heard this is commonplace, but it kind of surprised me. There's actually one more thing I want to bring up from the August 3rd build. Those of you who've seen Ebbe's cut enemies video, you might remember the spider that shoots venom instead of cobwebs. Well, as it turns out, this is actually from an August leftover, specifically an early version of that spider. The link had some cut sections that were inaccessible but could be reached with no clipping, and the sections themselves actually contain the cut variant. I actually did a check, and the models are different to the final game, not just in texture. Though it's clear they did the hanging spider for the Sparks minigames first, and then used that as a base. The E3 April 6th demo is currently one of the oldest builds we have access to. As a result, many of the tools that were made are not designed for it and are very unstable. Plus, Eurocom very frequently updated their formats in between builds and releases. However, the build actually has a lot of early models and designs that were either tweaked or removed later on. Unfortunately, due to how unstable they are in Eurochef, especially with PS2 files, I wasn't unfortunately able to rip everything or show off the models. Also, for anyone wondering, that there were never any GameCube or Xbox prototypes that were made. Eurocom mainly developed them on PS2 first. Some textures found are intended for older models not present, and that are unable to be viewed without modding them in, hence they aren't compatible with the newer ones. While the 2nd to 4th Realms level maps aren't present in the E3 demo, and no, I'm not counting the 4th Sergeant Bird Speedway. A number of NPCs and enemies from later into the game still exist in the files, such as Wally, Peggy, or even the Yeti, and a couple of them actually do have some early versions for their designs. Thanks to some of them being compatible with the final game's models and textures, I was actually able to capture footage of modding them in with the custom texture loader feature. First up is the naked large Nork that you can actually find in the final game's files. It is present in the E3 demo, however, there's a second texture that is not found in the final game, which turns out that it actually is armor for it. You see, how the armor works in the final game is when it's knocked off, it loads in a separate mesh for that animation. However, in the E3 demo, that early model for it is actually still used for that brief moment as a placeholder. I only found out because when I was playing it and ripping textures via my emulator's texture dumper, it actually picked up the texture. This was only later confirmed when I was looking for one of Ebbe's old videos and I discovered a brief moment where the model actually spawns in. This definitely now all but confirms that there were likely earlier designs for the Norks that were not present in the final game. Coastal remains as snapping crabs have textures that are darker than in the final, the small variants only being slightly redder. However, the larger blue variant is more visibly a darker shade of blue and lacks the target mark on the back of it. Peggy, the NPC that Spyro talks to for the 3rd turret minigame in Icy Wilderness, has more yellowy coloured feathers than the bluish and white ones used in the final game. Her eyelashes are also brown instead of black. The nanny from Dragon Village, also known as Mrs. Shoutfire, also seems to have an early design present in the demo. Unfortunately, her model is not present in the demo, as the nursery is incomplete and empty, but likely because it was not meant to be accessed at this point. However, the file does exist in the game. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to load her in or view it. However, I was able to grab her textures. The club variant of the Crocodile, or Crocodile enemy, however you pronounce it, also has an early texture. This texture has a black head feather, whilst the blue and orange ones are used in the final game. In addition, the sheep fodder is also more brown instead of the mouldy looking colour used in the final game. Coastal Remains and Sunken Ruins' clam enemy is the greenish yellow colour, unlike the final game where it is orange. In addition, the Murnork enemy, specifically the Trident variant, is a teal colour instead of the deeper green in the final game. Their Trident is also gold instead of silver. The Throwing Star variant has identical textures in the files, and thus has none of its own design at the time. The E3 demo was slapped together quickly, so it's likely Eurocom had already made most of the other realms into somewhat of a playable state. And given the early design of the Lizard and Wally being present, as well as the other NPCs from later on, it's possible to assume that the parts that were cut from the final game, like the baby mammoth area in Icy Wilderness, or the Lizard's platform challenge in Crocodile Swamp, might have still existed in the game at that point in development. Unfortunately, any level maps that weren't necessary for the demo were removed, so there's no way to check until an earlier build with them all intact gets leaked online. Eurocom likely couldn't remove the parts that you couldn't reach in case it broke something, so they just put up normal barriers to keep a normal player out since they couldn't bypass it without hacking. Hence why areas like like in Dragonfly Falls with the sharks, are still present on the demo. I don't think I've missed anything else, but I've been saving this best one for last. And this was found very recently. In the E3 demo exclusively, at least from what builds we have currently available, the file dragold1 actually contains an early version of what's believed to be Thomas's model. For anyone wondering, the one used in the demo is called dragold2 in the files. This unseen model was never visible in the game without modifications. However, thanks to Ebbe swapping out the model files, we now have actual footage of this mystery model. So I'm just going to let the clip speak for itself.
Look, there's a dark gem just over there. Why don't you try that horn dive I was telling you about?
Supposedly, this early design is actually based off this render from what I believe is from the PS1 trilogy, more accurately Spyro 1. The reason the model looks kinda glitchy is because in the footage it's using Thomas's animation data, which doesn't match up with this early design. For everyone who stuck around to the end of this, I want to thank you guys so much for watching this. This was a lot of fun to make, and I had a blast with finding all this cut stuff that hadn't been documented yet. Also, I'd like to give a special shout out to Ebbe who made some of this possible. And I really recommend you check out his videos and all the other crazy stuff he's been making for the game. Hopefully there'll be an earlier build that gets dumped sometime in the future, and we can see all the stuff that wasn't present in the demo, because I know the real reason they left Dragonfly Falls and the Dragon Village intact on there was because they couldn't just flat out remove all the chunks, otherwise it would break things. Also, the reason I didn't try switching the files in the newer versions is because, well, basically you can't take a demo file and put it in the new one. It doesn't work like that because the file format's is from a different version. I had the same idea for the Lizard, but then I was told that wouldn't work. The only reason we were able to pull it off with Beta Thomas is because it came from the same version as that demo. I mean, if we tried swapping it with the final game's Thomas, the game probably either wouldn't boot or would probably crash when he was loaded in. Anyway, let me know if you want to see me do more videos like this, because I wanted to change things up and do something different to the usual nonsense I'd put in months ago. That and I grew up playing Spyro, so it's kind of a guilty pleasure of mine. And despite the mixed reception I've been seeing, I honestly think Heroes Tales is definitely it is a good game. Could be better, could be a lot worse as I've seen, but it was still a solid title. And once again, thanks to everyone who let me borrow their footage, mainly Ebbe, because I'm basically hopeless when it comes to programming or modding. So you guys are the real heroes. Seriously though, you guys are awesome. Anyway, happy birthday to anybody whose birthday it is today, and I'll see you all next time if I do more of these, because I love seeing this cut and unused stuff, because I've been taking joy in ripping all the stuff that's been unused, and if there's ever a point where it does become rippable in some capacity, I will upload it to somewhere like the Moral Resource so anybody can take a look and see what they can do with it. Anyway, take care.